Does it mean as far as being planning myself, like with my business, right?
Right. Businesses need to think about ourselves. Earthquake country.
And I think that's uploaded. I'm going to make sure. Yeah. I apologize. Because sometimes last minute we get these and it's.
Okay, 1:30, the clock shows.
If I get it later, I'll put it on my computer. Thanks. Oops.
We will now bring number 45, Office of Emergency Services, Kevin O'Neill.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. A big change that's been coming for this upcoming fire season is something known as the Public Safety Power Shutoff, or PSPS. There's been a lot of talk about it. There's been a lot of work done already, but we have Eric from PG&E here to speak about it. He's going to give a brief presentation, and then if you have questions, you can ask him questions, and then I'll be adding a little bit more at the end about some of what we're doing here locally in San Benito County. So, Eric.
Thanks, Kevin. Chairman, members, Eric Daniels with PG&E. Pleasure to be here with you today. It's a shame the audience left. This is something that the community should hear, but there are ample opportunities for them to obtain information about this. PG&E has mailed information to all of our customers, as well as this information through various forms is available on our website. So there's a change in weather patterns that we've all experienced, and as a result of increased fire danger, not just in San Benito County, but throughout the PG&E service territory, we are embarking on some new programs to try to help address fire danger. And I want to give you a little overview of that today. Community Wildfire Safety Program is a larger umbrella package of programs, and this breaks them down. Do I just click? There we go. So the first item, we're going to talk about a little bit about the Wildfire Safety Centers. I'll give you a little explanation about what that is and how they're going to interact and help inform us of fire danger. We're going to talk about vegetation management. There's been some changes from the PUC on how we do our work. And in addition to our regular annual reliability work that we do, we're going to tell you a little about some of the changes. I'm going to talk to you about some accelerated inspections and the results of those inspections and the safety factors, quotients that they provide us. And then I'll give a little education about reclosers, the automation in our system in some places, and how they are, while very helpful during storm season, winter storm season, to help restore unplanned outages, they also can pose a danger during fire season, and I'm going to explain that and why we're turning the automation off. And then that gets us to the public safety power shutoff. We'll come back to that, though, in a second. In addition, the long-term support programs that we want to do to our system in the high fire threat areas of Tier 2 and Tier 3, and I'll explain that in a second. In the high fire threat areas, we want to do some hardening of our system to make it more resilient. I'll talk to you about some of those items, and then something called the resiliency zone as well. We'll talk about that in a second. But if we're successful with the with our continued veg management, the accelerated inspections, the automation repair changes, and then these hardening of the system in the long term, we will greatly reduce the risk of having to impose a PSPS. And so that's why I want to talk about those first before we come back to PSPS. So let's go through a few of these and give you a little overview. PG&E currently has a weather center. We already have an entire team of forecasters. Just like you watch on the nightly news, we have a team in in San Ramon that monitors the weather on an everyday basis and into the future, monitoring when and where weather patterns are going to occur. It helps educate us so that we can stage equipment and staff in the right places. If there's a storm in a certain area, we can move people to that area so that they can be ready to react if there are unplanned outages. That weather center is now going to be augmented with something called the Wildfire Safety Operations Center. They'll use some of the same tools, weather stations and things of that sort, but we're going to add to the pre-existing complement of weather stations that are out in the communities. You can obtain information about these weather stations that's publicly accessible. There's a website there, and anybody can monitor them. We're going to add 1,300 more to the PG&E service territory in the high fire threat area. So the Tier 1 and Tier 2 as per CAL FIRE. We're also going to add 600, or not add, but install 600 high-definition cameras in the high fire threat area at sites that are near our infrastructure. So remember, our interest here is to make sure that our infrastructure does not become a problem in a high fire threat area. So with that information, this center operating 24/7 is going to be monitoring fire threat, and we'll get to what happens when they identify these factors as being in the danger zone in a couple of slides. Vegetation management is something that PG&E does on an annual basis, both for our gas distribution and transmission system, as well as on our vegetation distribution and transmission system. The changes having to do with the electric grid are that the conductors, or as you might refer to them as the wires, we've had to maintain an 18-inch clearance around the conductors in the past per PUC requirements. The PUC made a change, give or take a year ago, that the clearance is now a 4-foot clearance. So we have been, throughout the system, maintaining a 4-foot clearance around the conductors. That is standard practice. We have augmented that with a goal that in the high fire threat area, PG&E would work with property owners and obtain a 12-foot, if we can do it, if the property owner will work with us for that. Where they don't, we'll compromise with what they will allow us, but for the most part, we get some pretty good cooperation because they understand the fire danger here. The other thing we'll do is work with them to remove any dead and dying trees that are on their property that have that are within the potential of striking the lines, even if they're outside of our easement area. We'll work with the property owners for that. And of course, they are gladly willing to let us take dead and dying trees off their property. So that is positive, to remove those dangers. The other thing that we're doing to the with respect to veg management is the pink area you see on the chart going straight up from the conductors. We want to maintain that line of sight. We don't want to have any vegetation growing up over the top of the conductors. In the past, we would have allowed that as long as they were beyond the 18 inches. Now we won't. So we're going to maintain that. And that is throughout the system, even in the urban and rural areas.
Eric, Executive Chair. So once you get that 18-foot clearance and that straight up clearance, how long does that last?
Let me clarify, it's 4-foot clearance or 12-foot, not
Okay.
18.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I don't want to set any
For how many years does that?
forever. That's what we're going to maintain.
Okay,
So we're going through, right now, we're calling it emergency vegetation management, where we're getting up to this standard throughout, and then we'll maintain that through our regular reliability and emergency maintenance work. It's not just a one-time deal.
right.
In addition, and similarly, with respect to inspections of our facilities, we currently do inspections of all of our facilities, being the towers or the poles, on an annual rotating basis. But what we're doing at this point is a wholesale inspection. We've sent teams out through the entire grid system, especially in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 area. That's where we're focused, Tier 2 and Tier 3 area. And again, I'll tell you where that is in a second. We are doing an entire inspection of the infrastructure. Historically, we've always used manpower. Someone would climb up the pole or up the tower from the inside looking out, take photographs, send that information up to San Ramon for analysis. We've used helicopters in the more rural areas, so South County, I'm sure they've seen helicopters along the distribution and transmission lines that run down there. Those helicopters, I know my family's ranch is down there, and they come by on an annual basis from time to time. They will have a boom on the bottom of them that has a camera that flies up next to the tower, takes a photograph, and that information is sent up to San Ramon. We're augmenting that through this program and into the future, hiring teams of professional drone operators that will go to each tower and will fly up the outside of a tower, looking into the tower, taking photographs from the outside in, and then sending that up to San Ramon. The data that's collected through these sources will be put together, and the analysts will identify if there are any issues that have to do with that facility. They could be fasteners that are loose, fasteners that are broken, bolts, rust, chip flakes on coatings, any of these kinds of things and others. They'll identify them. If they identify that there's a safety issue, a tag will be sent to our service planning team. Our service planning engineers will then design a repair for whatever that issue is, and then the crews will be dispatched. Throughout our service territory in the high fire threat area, Tier 1 and 2, we have already completed all of the inspections. The design teams are now working on something over 50,000, give or take, tags that came in throughout that whole area, and they then will be sending out the crews to make the repairs. So the next part of what the public might see are crews in droves out on site making repairs. The opportunity here is for us to bring the grid up to as close to brand new as possible, so that we will then again remove the sort of dangers that we've seen in the past. This slide just talks about the crews making the repairs. But let's talk about some things into the more distant future, not the immediate work, but more distant future. In the high fire threat areas, we want to remove as many wooden structures as possible. So wooden poles will be replaced with metal poles in the long run. Cross arms in selected areas where it makes sense to do it. Cross arms will be replaced with broader cross arms so that the conductors are farther away from one another, which has a corollary impact on veg management because now we have that larger clearance going outward. But that's in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 more rural areas. And then also in those same areas, we want to, where it's the right thing to do, replace some of the conduit with insulated line so that it's tree sensitive because of that, or less sensitive to trees because it'll have insulation on the line, on the conductor. And then the other thing is very far off is the idea of a resiliency zone. So this sounds a little futuristic, but I mean, it's where we're headed. It's the idea that there would be isolated energy sources within the grid, not at generation stations, although they themselves could be a generating station, but most likely, at least in the near future, there will probably be some form of battery storage unit, so that if a section of the grid has to be isolated from the rest of the grid, from wherever its energy source was coming from, there will still be some sort of energy source that can be fed back out into the grid from that location. It may not be sustainable for the entire grid, but it could be for some key areas of a community. So those have not been thought out into the details yet. There's just something to know that is something that's being plotted out. As you can see, those items and the ones that we talked about in the past, just a slide or two ago, will really make the grid much more robust, much more less likely to be susceptible to these dangerous weather conditions that we're going to talk about in a minute. Before we do, I want to mention also this because this can have some impact to the rural sensitivities here in San Benito County. Some years ago, the industry standard was to reduce the length of outages as much as we possibly could. Of course, everybody benefits from that because your power doesn't go out as long as it might have otherwise. The idea would be these automatic reclosers. This is automation within the grid, allowing the grid to try to find the nearest the nearest source of energy to re-energize any line that might have been taken out of commission by either a tree strike or a car running into a pole. Isolate that area where the danger is, but then re-energize up to that area as close as possible. You know, during winter season, when I send you a notification because of an outage in the community, it says something to the effect often that our distribution engineers are in the process of reconfiguring the grid to reduce the footprint of the outage. You remember reading those words from me in the past? That's very similar to what this does, but this does it automatically. The lines are operational. A tree branch hits the lines and creates a short. The automation opens so that the line is no longer energized. But the grid tries to find a way to re-energize it, hoping that the foreign object has fallen off of the limb. And as it does that automatic re-energization, trying to find the best route in which to do that from, because there's more than one of these, there's a whole bunch of them, every time it sends power through that line, if that foreign object is still on that line, it's going to send a charge to it, and it could spark and create fire. So in the winter season, winter storm season, the automation will continue to operate so that if there are winter storms, we can restore grid quicker. But in the fire season, which as you all know is a larger and larger period of our time nowadays, we're going to disengage the automation. The impact to the customer is that instead you used to see that little blink of light sometimes happen when you're at the dinner table at night when a power outage, that was a power outage about to occur, but the grid found a new way to re-energize you through this automation, and you barely even knew that it occurred. It does it that fast. That won't happen now in the fire season in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas. Now, the city of Hollister is not in Tier 2 and Tier 3, but just outside of town it is. And I'll show you a map in a second.
So my
That
power-
means that the crew member has to go out there and manually re-energize that line, so it'll take longer for the restoration to occur. That's the point of the moral of that little story.
So are you just doing that in high risk fire areas, not in?
Not wholesale throughout the grid. So in the San Juan Valley, it's all fertile land.
Right.
If a spark
So my
were-
power went out yesterday afternoon. It was probably some guy hitting a power pole.
it
Got to pay your bill.
It might have been, the chairman might be onto something there, but most likely.
I have been on vacation.
Come on, you got to,
Most likely, it is not that. It's most likely that a foreign object or has come in contact with the grid, or there's been some disruption to it because some impact has occurred. So that was just a long story to let you know why your constituents might have during the summertime longer outages during that are unplanned outages. Now let's go back and remember that I talked to you about the Wildfire Center. So those folks in that center are observing these conditions through the technology that we're providing them to observe. They're going to be monitoring when there's a national red flag warning from the National Weather Service. And of course, what that means is it's a very hot day. And of course, it gets hot in San Benito County, especially in South County. You can get 100-degree temperatures. The grid can sustain that. We're talking about temperatures that are beyond what we're used to having. So let's say more sustained 115-degree temperatures, 118-degree temperatures, really extremely hot days. Added to that, low humidities, which of course go together in our neighborhood. This is not like Florida where you can have high temperatures and high humidity. So those two sort of go together. And then conditions of the fuel on the ground through our monitors that will be out in the field, as well as through those cameras I mentioned to you, identifying what those conditions are. Then add to it the real danger in the mix, and that is high winds. So as I said, the grid can sustain heat. The grid is used to that. The temperature will go up in some one day, and we'll have a red flag warning. Everybody's turning their air conditioners on. There's a lot of energy pulsing through the power lines, and they're designed so that they sag a little bit when that happens, just like your extension cord that you've plugged in too many outlets, too many things into it, and you feel the cord, it gets a little warm. That's the same kind of thing going on here. It'll sag a little bit. There's a design factor built into that, but then add to that ferocious winds. So now those lines are swaying, and they're putting tension on the towers, putting tension on the fasteners, and that's where we start to see the compromise in the integrity of the system. So when these points, these factors become in a dangerous level, we will deem that the conditions in that location within the high fire threat area are too dangerous for the grid to operate safely. And if that should occur, we will shut the power off on that section of the line because it's too dangerous for the line to be operational in that kind of dangerous weather condition. It's not that dangerous weather condition, those dangerous weather conditions have to happen everywhere. They don't have to happen here in Hollister. They have to happen where our facilities go through the high fire threat areas. So where are those? This is very hard to see, but let's look at that one. So you don't have any tier 3 in San Benito County. You have tiers 2. The orange, yellow is tier 2. So it's less of a threat, but it's still a threat. We're basically viewing the two of them almost as equal in this dangerous situation. Although we're starting all of the major work in the tier 3 and then working to the tier 3. I'm sorry, we're starting in tier 3, working to tier 2. Transmission lines pass through San Benito County from Moss Landing, basically where the word San Benito is written, give or take. And that's a 230 kV line that comes in from the valley, and that's what's bringing energy into our community. The power lines at Moss Landing are 500 kV lines. They also pass through San Benito County, but no energy is relieved from them until they get to the grid in the valley. So the energy passes through here and goes to the Central Valley, and then energy is brought back to us and to the Monterey Peninsula area on 230 kV lines. That's the line that we need to be concerned of for you folks, as well as any distribution lines that are passing through that yellow area. So South County is, and down Bear Valley, et cetera, is at issue here for distribution. If the power line passes in that yellow area and those weather conditions I talked about are at play, the power could be shut off on that location. So does that mean that the power does not go off in Hollister? It might. If it is a distribution line going down Highway 25 to the Pinnacles that falls in that zone, and we need to shut that line off, doesn't really affect anybody north of that, because that line heads south, goes down to Lone Oak, and only the folks along there would be impacted. If, however, it's the 230 kV line that I talked about that's bringing energy from the valley to support the Tri-County area, then we could have a larger impact. But we have some ways to do some backfeeding. There's also a 230 kV line that comes down from the Metcalf station, which is the very large substation that looks like a fortress up on Highway 101 south of San Jose. That has a 230 line that also comes down to Moss Landing, so we can backfeed. So there is some dance of the system that we can play with. However, know that that line does go through that little red tail in Santa Cruz County of Tier 3. So the point of this is just so that you understand where the danger places are if we have to call a PSPS. Now, how do we do it? We don't just shut the power off. It's going to be a methodical process is how this goes about. It's part of the reason why we've had such a big effort to get the word out about this coming program in the first place. By the way, you should know, this is not a new program in the industry. Power companies throughout the country implement public safety power shutoff. San Diego Gas and Electric has been doing it for years, but not in great degrees. They've not had to, but they have it on their ability to do it. It's in their game plan. PG&E has just simply never done it before, and so now we're going to start to institute it as a potential policy, or as a policy that we potentially could do, and that's the newness to us in this area. But it isn't that it's a new program in the industry. The idea is that we want to give, when possible, this is a goal, a 48-hour notice. So we're doing this now just to get the word out. Everybody's received information through their bills and through mailings from us. We've asked people to update their contact information in their accounts for their emails, their text numbers, and their hardline phones. We have our media team that's been communicating to the media to try to get the word out. Public meetings like this, we're meeting with the first responder community as well. So the word is getting out that it's a potential that could happen. Then 48 hours, that weather center is going to identify that in 48 hours from whatever the time it is, they predict that we're going to have to do a power shutoff because the dangerous conditions will be too dangerous for our power grid. When they do that, we'll have all of this communication engaged. So there will be ample information going out to all parties, a whole team that also deals with baseline community, baseline medical community, a team that deals with medical community, team that deals with different sorts of customer base, whether they're cities or whether they're school districts, etc. Then at 24 hours, we will reevaluate whether we're still predicting that the power shutoff might occur in 24 more hours, and we'll provide another complete communication outreach. And then just before it is to be done as well. Then during the outage, there's going to be some public relations issues because people are going to be in a community where they don't understand why their power is out because perhaps it's not hot there and they're not in these weather conditions. Then we need to start to educate them that the power that comes to you, however, passes through one of these fire danger areas that is in a dangerous weather environment at the moment. We will not turn the power back on until that emergency climatic condition subsides. And therein lies the difficulty in giving any suggestion as to how long they will take, because until we know how long the weather stays in a dangerous condition, we cannot turn the power back on. So just understand that. And of course, you understand your community. When do all of those factors we talk about all happen at the same time in this area, and how long do they usually last? It's not very often, so I want you to understand that going into this. And then as we start to restore, there's a process for that as well. We can't, again, just flip the switch and everybody's lights come back on. There has to be a methodical way of going about it. Because the outage could be sometime, we need to send crews out to do inspections, and because the automation isn't out there anymore to try to re-energize for us, we have to send crews out to do inspections and then restore that area, do an inspection, restore that area, do an inspection, restore that area. So it could take some time for it to be 100%, but it won't take the entire time for 100% to be restored. It'll be staggered. Having said that, I think I've talked about that. I just want to draw attention to the top left. Well, any of these, just some of the outreach methodologies. But I do want the public to be aware that www.pge.com/mywildfirealerts is where we ask you to go to get more information about this. Tomorrow there is a webinar. If you go to this site, you can find the information about the webinar at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And you can watch basically this same kind of presentation. Also, this is the site where you can go to upload and update your contact information. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you guys might have.
Yes, sir. I wanted to thank Eric for coming down and presenting. This is going to be a critical issue for all of us, I believe, because we do have that transmission line coming through where you see San Benito there. So I think even our city supervisors should be aware of this, and city council members. I know the city manager actually gave a nice presentation. I think he had heard from you potentially, I'm not sure. So that's why I had the idea to invite you here. So I appreciate that. Anything we can do to get the word out on our social media accounts, they do have a really good social media things you can share to get out to your constituents. So I really encourage everybody to get out there to start thinking now that if you're out without power for 2 or 3 days, what are you going to do? How are you going to take care of your food, your pets, your water supply, all that stuff? We need to start thinking about that. So,
And if I may add,
Yes, go ahead.
sir, it's not just because of this. Quite frankly, that should be something everyone in San Benito County especially should be have already thought about. This is earthquake country, as we know from history, and the power grid can go out for many reasons, and it could be out for some time. And so those kind of emergency kits are things that everyone should be thinking about, businesses and residents alike.
Yeah, I want to add too, I've known Eric for quite some time now, and I appreciate the information you send us through email as well. You've always been there for, like this morning answering a question on a constituent's concern that got to you, and you were informing me how to answer that, and I really appreciate that information. It's real helpful. PG&E is doing a lot of precautionary type of work, and it's a big change in some areas, and people don't like seeing their trees cut, but it's absolutely necessary for public safety, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
So I actually contacted not only Eric but our CAO when I got the email as a business, because I'm downtown, and one of the things that came to mind is obviously the question as far as like our area, right? So we understanding, even though our area is not necessarily these complete danger zones, but it's interconnected. Like, what are the possibilities? Does that mean we have to pay attention to the valley weather, and what would create some kind of a issue in that area that would affect us because we're interconnected?
Valley weather area, valley area weather is probably not of concern here. Note that out east of the county line, there's no tier 2 or tier 3 area. But as the power line comes in from the valley
Yep.
and through our county here, it does pass through the tier 2. So understanding the weather pattern in your community is probably the most important for you.
Okay. Well, and so within that context, though, it's still for me to be prepared. I have a lot of refrigeration in my business that if the power goes out, then I could potentially lose a lot of money with the cost of my products. So, some kind of so I brought this to our CAO, if there's a way to basically come up with some kind of a game plan ourselves to support our community. I know it'd probably be a heavy lift, but even on the educational side, I mean, I know there's switches you could have as a business with a backup generator or something to that element. I think it'd be a healthy conversation. And again, it's not for the county to start funding things, but to a certain extent, at least the education, so we have a better outcome.
So let me comment on that in a couple of ways. First, yes, you're right. It's the responsibility of business owners to try to determine how they're going to address this if, in fact, they believe that long-term outages could have an impact to their infrastructure or their product. Backup generation is clearly something that they should think about. We have information in the website about how to learn more about what kind of backup generation you might want to consider. We don't have recommendations on what you should buy. That'll be up to you and your contractor to determine. But backup generation in many different ways, whether it's solar panels or whether it's cogeneration if you have a facility where that would work, or if it's diesel backup generation. Those things need to be worked into the grid properly, so you do need to have your contractor consider how you're going to do that. For instance, if you have rooftop solar on your house, you already know that if the power goes out, most likely your power goes out too. Yep. There's a reason for that. We can't have your small generation system generating electricity that's pushing into the grid if we have firemen trying to untangle a car from a power line down the street after we've shut the grid off. And so that's why those are turned off. Now, if you have installed when you had that solar installation put on your rooftop, or you can do it aftermarket, a disconnection from the grid, you can then become your own miniature little electric fiefdom. Basically, one of those resiliency zones I'm talking about, just for your own home or your own business, and that is something to consider. It can be costly, however, I recognize that. Then the other thing I wanted to mention is there is, and I think Kevin's going to talk about it, every jurisdiction, every agency has an emergency plan, government entity. So you need to look at what you have for your emergency plan and start to consider how do you fold in the PSPS potential impact into your emergency plan. And so how would you stand up and how would you assist the public if in fact that it needed to be, your emergency plan needed to be instituted as a result of a PSPS.
Any other questions? Any comments from the public?
Well, I actually
Bring it.
have something else to add if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Of course.
So I just wanted to kind of give you an update on what we've been doing here locally in San Benito County to prepare for this. Where I think, excuse me, where I think this even presentation came from is about a week and a half ago or so, the Office of Emergency Services hosted a meeting with all of our public safety, water utilities, and city management officials, where we presented basically the same presentation. So Billy Avera, the city manager for Hollister, was there, and I believe then he reported to the city council. So that was step one. Our number one priority, if there is a public safety power shutoff, is ensuring that our critical infrastructure and our essential services remain functional. So what is that? That's our communication infrastructure. That's our pump stations, our wells. That's making sure that our fire engines and police officers are able to continue to respond to calls, and to make sure that people can still call 911, right? So when people turn on their sink, they're getting water. So that's our number one priority. And to accomplish that and to build a more resilient county, we are acquiring a list of all generators within the county that are attached to public facilities. So again, fire stations, pump stations, et cetera. And we are working on a contract for emergency fuel supply with some local vendors here. Dassels is already on board. They want to help out in any way possible. We're just doing the work now to have a contract in place so there's a funding mechanism, and just to kind of protect ourselves as well from any price gouging or anything like that. But as you may or may not know, generators only work for 12 to 24 hours without refueling. So that is critical. Second priority would be what Supervisor Hernandez alluded to, which is that economic impact that a prolonged shutoff may have. That's going to need to be incident dependent. The specifics we'll have to address, but that, as Mr. Daniels pointed out, is why we have our emergency operations plan, our emergency operations center, why we exercise and train and have those systems in place to address those unique scenarios and make sure we're doing what's best for the community. Now, one thing I do want to quantify the likelihood of the shutoff happening here, and this is only one metric, one thing that PG&E looks at. But in the last 10 years, we've only had 16 red flags somewhere in the county. Right, so sometimes it's just been a little piece of Pinnacles or down south. Sometimes it's been a wider area, but there's only been 16 in the last 10 years, so a little over one a year. And that's only one of, I believe, six factors that PG&E looks at. There's absolutely other regions in the state that are worse off than us, but fingers crossed, knock on wood. We're hoping for a pretty. I don't even know if I want to finish that sentence just in case, but we're preparing for the worst, but we're hoping for the best. And I think we have everything in place to address it if it does happen. So,
Hey, Kevin, quick question. You mentioned about having vendors in place in case of emergency. Is there like an option agreements with them where you're paying them to have standby material and supplies and fuel?
That's not what we're talking about. I don't know if that's an option. What we would be talking about is essentially just a not to exceed amount in a contract where they would provide whatever services they can at that time. Which is why we're looking at multiple sources. Dassels was the one I had the most recent conversation with, and they they don't want to commit to anything because they have multiple obligations as well. But they do recognize that that we are one of their top priorities given the public safety factor.
You mean we're one of the top customers?
That too.
Any other questions? No? And we really addressed the public? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Staff, nothing, okay. Now we'll go to 46, County Administrator Officers, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd like to invite up Dulce Alonso. She's our management analyst in administration. She's going to go ahead and open this up. And we also have Jamala here for affordable housing conversation. Thank you.
Actually, I'm just going to open the PowerPoint and give it over to Jamila. So 1 second. But as I'm opening, do you want to introduce?
Yeah, that works out fine. Can I move to sweep that?
Yeah, perfect.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. Like Ray said, my name is Jamila, and I am both the Housing Programs Coordinator for the City of Hollister and San Benito County. Today, in front of you, I will be providing an introduction to our affordable housing ordinance. As Dulce brings up the PowerPoint presentation, I just want to give a little bit of background and kind of some historical information regarding the affordable housing ordinance. So, as some board members who were present, the affordable housing ordinance was actually passed in 2016. So the ordinance has been available since that time. As the past year has gone by, back in our fall retreat for this year's board, it was provided and requested to be able to review and amend some portions of the affordable housing ordinance. One biggest portion that was not addressed in the previously approved ordinance was having an in lieu payment and having some other amendments that were discussed at the fall retreat. Since the time at the fall retreat, both staff and other members have been meeting together, and we have vetted some information through an ad hoc committee. That ad hoc committee included staff like us two here, and then two planning commissioners as well. Within that ad hoc committee, I myself did address a few other organizations, some local developers, and some local nonprofit developers as well, requesting some of their feedback and some of their information. And most recently, I believe just last week, the Planning Commission met and at this time have voted 5-0 to move forward with the current amended affordable housing ordinance as written. They did make a couple of suggestions, and I will address that in a moment as well. So one of the main purposes for the affordable housing ordinance is to enhance the overall public welfare, benefit the property being developed, and overall provide an assortment of housing for individuals from extremely low, very low, low, and moderate income. With the affordable housing ordinance, we did not make significant changes. Again, this is just an amendment to the ordinance. This is not a new ordinance. Most importantly, at this time, we did remove the previous sections that were labeled 21.03.14 through .016. They were labeled like affordable by design and development standards. At this time, we did not have any suggestions or wanting to expand those sections, so we did remove that. And I apologize, there is an error in my presentation. We didn't necessarily remove the density bonus section. It's just removed from the amended portion because we didn't make any changes at this time. The second portion that we wanted to include and have a larger definition to is extremely low income and the use of potentially future in lieu payments towards the use of and production of extremely low units. At this time, just like before, a developer does not have to provide extremely low units, but we thought if in the future we do receive payments for it, that we can be able to use that towards the production of extremely low units. It wasn't quite clarified in the past ordinance. And then, like we have mentioned before, at different times in different presentations, and particularly at the Fall Board of Supervisors retreat, extremely low units is part of our RENA expectations. So as a county, we are expected to be providing units at all income levels. I will go a little bit more in depth in terms of number 3 and 4, but at this time we did update sections to the Housing Advisory Committee and included housing advisory bylaws included as well to be reviewed because we did not have any at this time. And then lastly, establishing an in lieu payment and an inclusionary unit cost.
Did you update the administrative manual at all?
Not yet. Originally, that was my goal, to be presenting all three, the amendment to the ordinance, the Housing Advisory Committee bylaws, and then an updated administrative manual. But with time and wanting to present information, we still just have what was approved in 2004. So it is my goal at this later time, once we get some more direction regarding the amended ordinance, to provide the administrative manual, which is basically what provides my day-to-day operations. So it's not necessarily something that would change due to the ordinance, but can kind of affect depending on how a Board of Supervisors approves certain portions. Great question. So the first section that was amended was, like I said, establishing Housing Advisory Committee bylaws. With our ad hoc committee, we felt that it was important to include an additional member to our Housing Advisory Committee. One of those reasons, it's a little bit easier to have a majority. Previously, it was 2 planning commissioners, 2 Board of Supervisors, and only 2 public members. But as a committee, we felt that it was important to add an additional public member. With our Housing Advisory Committee, we would like to see the public members with a background in affordable housing development, building development, and then a financial or accounting background that can be able to help provide different insight. So that is our goal with our Housing Advisory Committee. And then before I do get into the next slide, I want to explain something that I believe helped clarify in the amended affordable housing ordinance. One thing when it comes to an in lieu payment is that sometimes people or even the public may be under the interpretation that when an applicant comes, if they choose not to provide affordable units, that they will just then write a check to the San Benito County for a payment to us for not providing those units. But I really want to address and let it be known as well that as the Board of Supervisors, it is your authority and your power to determine whether an applicant can provide that full in lieu payment. So it's something that they have to prove on record and show as a developer that they cannot provide affordable housing within their development. As a Board of Supervisors, you would be able to make that choice. It would not necessarily be the applicant themselves making that choice. Did you have a question, Chair? Oh, okay.
No, ma'am.
Actually, I have a question.
Yes.
So, if the developer asks that if they can show that they cannot provide the component, the unit, does that mean they get to build it off-site or?
Yeah,
pay
so
it?
they have that option as well, and they would have to prove that if they really cannot even provide off-site, then the last option and what would be approved by or could be approved by the Board of Supervisors is that in lieu payment. So again, it's not just something that's a quick decision based on the applicant. They really do have to vet and show that they cannot provide those affordable units on site.
Is the lieu payment, is that a set dollar?
I'll go over that shortly, and at this time it technically is a set dollar amount, but the whole purpose for the public hearing, this is just an introduction. So I'm here to be able to take your opinions, take the public's thoughts, and see how we can address it as well. And I will be addressing that in the next slide. two things in which will be shown in the next two slides is items that we did not amend in the ordinance. These are still maintained in the current and then what will be hopefully in the future ordinance as well is the expectation for on-site development. So just as an example, if a developer were to want to build 100 units, the expectation is still to provide 15% on-site. So that would be 15 on-site units or affordable units. In the ordinance and currently written, and which was not amended, there is then a breakdown based on percentages. So an applicant would be expected to provide 5% moderate income units, 5% low income units, and then 5% very low income units.
Yes.
Sorry, Jamel, I have a lot of comments I'll save for the end, but might as well hit this one while we're on the slide.
Of course.
You mentioned that there is not a breakdown. When you go to the next slide, we're going to see that it changes a little bit based on the fractional when it's not an even number. How are we determining that? Is that random? Is that something we are going to codify in the future? What's the thoughts there?
Sorry, I may not be understanding the
I
question
understand
a little bit.
the 15% affordables, got that. I see where that's coming from. I understand that. When you break it down into 5, 5, and 5, you just mentioned, I believe I heard you right, that you said it's not codified in our existing ordinance. Is that correct, or did you say it is codified?
So this is what is still codified in our current ordinance.
And then when you hit the next slide, do you mind?
Yeah, so this next slide is related to off-site production.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I should just let you keep going.
Is that which one you were thinking of, or were you thinking this about the slide after? Okay, no worries. I'll definitely hold and pause when we get there. No problem. So I just wanted to then explain as well that still maintain in the amended ordinance that if an applicant were approved by the Board of Supervisors to provide off-site units, the expectation is still 20%. So for instance, if a development were to be 100 units, the expectation is to provide 20 affordable units. Still maintained in the amended ordinance is a breakdown of expected percentages based on income levels. So 8% would be for moderate income units, 6% low income units, and then 6% very low income units. And that is still maintained in the current ordinance, or the current amended ordinance. The next slide that Supervisor Gillio is referring to, I will be going through table by table and column by column. I think personally is kind of the most involved portion of the amendment to the ordinance, and it will take the most time to go over as well. So if you have questions throughout, let me know, and I can definitely pause. Hopefully I won't lose my train of thought either. So what you see before you here is an affordability gap analysis. We originally and still contracted with Gruen Associates, who completed an affordability gap analysis. What an affordable gap analysis is basically looking at, or what methodology they used and what we continue to use in our example is comparing what a market rate unit price is compared to what an affordable unit price would be, and what is that gap, and what are we missing, what are we needing to provide to fill in that portion. So just still using Gruen's methodology is we did compare 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom units. With the main difference, though, is we did include extremely low income into our gap analysis. One reason for that is we do want to use future, if we do receive future in lieu payments, to be able to use that towards the production. So on the left-hand side, you will see the breakdown of each of the income levels: extremely low income, very low, low, and moderate. And the next column over where it says average market price, that was Gruen's determination for San Benito County's average market price of $613,500. And the next two columns, it is based on the affordable price for a 3- and 4-bedroom unit.
So I see the affordability study, but was there a nexus study done also?
So based on updated legal laws, and county jurisdiction can be able to complete an affordability gap analysis as a means to determine an in lieu payment. So a nexus study is not something that has to be, for lack of better terms, mandatory for a county or for any jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, walk me through this.
Yes.
I read it last night over and over, and I even called Ray last night, and I couldn't.
11.
So,
Yeah.
so, all right, let's talk about the first one, the extremely low. So you're saying that on the market it'll be $613,000.
Yes, that's Gruen Gruen's determination for the average market rate price in San Benito County.
And then an affordable price at the 3-bedroom, 4-person, that's the income, right? That's how much they're gonna be able to make to qualify for that?
So that's the affordable unit price.
That affordable unit for a house. That's how much a house will cost for?
To be sold for to purchase from for those income level sections.
Okay. And then the next number, 83,000, is the, okay, got that. And then the
Okay.
average affordable price is 79.
Yes.
So the gap is $533,000.
I'll go over that next, and I'll explain those next two slides because that's where it does get a little bit. It took me a moment reading Gruen Gruen's report, honestly, where I needed to understand their methodology.
Okay.
So their next methodology is where it states average affordable price. So they took the average between each income level, extremely low, very low, low, and moderate. So if, let's just say, for instance, we look at the moderate income level, the affordable price for a 3-bedroom is the $365,000, and then the affordable price for a 4-bedroom is $395,000. The average is then that $380,000. So under that column that says average affordable price, it looks at the prices between a 3 and 4-bedroom. Still using Gruen & Gruen's methodology. So where it says 79, 140, 202, 380, that's the average for each of those income levels. Okay. And then what they did next is to determine the actual gap. So the gap is the difference between the market rate price and what the average affordable price is. So if you were to subtract $380,000 from the average market rate price of $613,500, you come to an amount of $233,500. So where that gap is, that's basically taking the average market price and subtracting that from the gap. Or excuse me, subtracting that from the average affordable price. And let me know if I need to explain that differently or, okay. Then still using Gruen Gruen's methodology is determining the average gap. So if you were to take all the numbers that are listed under the column gap from the 533,000 to the 233,000 about, the average gap then is 413,000. And then from there, if you were to multiply 20% for the in lieu payment, that would be the amount of $82,600.
So a 20-unit project, right? It's a 100-unit project, right? They would have to pay $82,000 per unit.
Times 20.
Per building unit, not per inclusionary unit.
Per building unit.
Yeah, so 1
Correct.
So it'll be, how much would that be? On a 100-unit, how much do they pay?
million something.
Million something?
Yeah.
That's, was it 8.2?
8.26, yeah.
8.26.
So,
Before we go forward,
yes.
you did mention it already. I really want to understand where the extremely low came from, because that's really what kind of skews this
It does
a lot,
increase.
because most jurisdictions have very low, low, and moderate.
Yes,
and-
it does increase the average gap.
Yeah, wow.
Our biggest reason as an ad hoc committee to include it is, one, as an expectation with our RENA, the county is expected, to be able to maintain and provide and incorporate extremely low income units, and then also having the future potential use of the in lieu payments towards the production of extremely low units. That was the reason for that. It doesn't necessarily have to be maintained. That's why we're here discussing. But as a committee, we felt that that was an important income level to include as well.
Thank you.
I have a question before we go to your
Sure,
more
sure.
brilliant question, Mr. Chairman. I was looking through this, and I only see it being addressed for houses. To me, I don't believe low income people necessarily need a house. If I was a developer, I was to build a 100-unit development, can't I just build a 15-unit apartment complex and call it good?
I think as a Board of Supervisors, well, first, that project would go to the Planning Commission, then would go to the Board of Supervisors. I don't think that's something that the current ordinance, it doesn't specifically address, but at the same time, it does allow for flexibility. So that is something that can be vetted through Planning Commission and vetted through the Board of Supervisors. I think one of the biggest intentions for it is, we do see a lot of single-family units being built, and the purpose for this type of inclusionary housing is to have it be included within the unit, within the production of that entire community. So it's not necessarily just a section that this is where our very low to moderate or very low to low income live, or that this is the only section. So I think the intention behind is to build an included community and to build something where it's, not just multifamily units, but at the same point, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't. So that's something that can be reviewed.
But, I think the reality of things is you could put a family in an apartment, and I think we need to have more zero lot line type of construction, and higher densities to house different economic scales.
And I think, sorry.
And that's what I was looking for today, and I don't see it here at all. I think that's what this community needs, is more rental units. And we're not build houses for everybody. Not everybody is going to go in a house. That's a reality of today. And that's what the cities are doing now. Those are all they're building up. And Hollister has a couple of good
Yes, they do.
projects here going. And I think that's what we have to somehow encourage. Whatever development, I don't want a whole lot of development out in the unincorporated areas. I think we're moving away from that as well. But to meet affordable, it's through rental. You're not going to come up with a down payment. Low income guy doesn't come up with a down payment for a $600,000 house, and I don't think a developer could supply it on the other end too. The in lieu fee went from too low where we're at right now to way too high being proposed here. That's just my feelings about it.
The quick question I had was, when we're looking at the restrictions on the sale of the house after, that's what, I know that's probably part of your administrative manual. When I'm thinking of the research I've done is when I look at, let's say they had it for a prolonged period of time and then they sell it. Is there a certain period of time they have to wait in order to, is it 30 years? Is it 40 years?
So that's one item that has not been amended either.
Okay.
One of the reasons that it's written in there for a deed restriction is to preserve the affordability of these units. It gets to be slightly difficult when reporting to the state if we have a constant influx of, well, this unit is affordable, this unit is no longer affordable, well, now we have these numbers. So part of the reason for having a deed restriction is to preserve the affordability. In terms of what is typically written, is that they will be signing a resale restriction. So within that resale restriction, which would be vetted through our legal counsel, is typically, and a family could be able to sell their home at any point within that 30 years. But it has a restricted price that they can sell it back to the community member so that it could be then affordable for another community member.
Is 30 now changing to 45, the average?
Typically, it's maintained with the length of a home mortgage loan. There are some jurisdictions that go higher than that. There are some within the city of Hollister that there are a few that have 45-year restrictions. But I think part of the reasons why we've maintained 30 years is follows the length of a loan. And then it still gives, that family that chance to even see it through the length to later on maybe even sell it at market rate.
Well, I know there's still a lot of comments to be done, but what I'm looking at right now is there's just, and I know you guys put a lot of time and effort into this, and I'm the last person that likes to kick things down the road. But what are the chances of possibly looking at kicking this back to the Planning Commission and to the ad hoc group and doing a little bit more work on some of the things that we brought up? And I know there's still two other people that probably want to speak, along with some people out in the audience here. So that's just how I feel right now, because I've done some research over the last couple days since I received the agenda, and there's just a lot of gray area still that when we do something, I want to do it right, and I want to do it right the first time.
I absolutely agree. So our goal was to provide and move forward we recommended to the July 23rd Board of Supervisors for a public hearing. But I believe as an ad hoc committee and as the person who it is their job to, as the housing programs coordinator, to work with the Board of Supervisors, work with our planning commissioners, and work with staff, I have no problem going further and taking recommendations. I think that's the most important part.
And I can speak for myself. It's my fault because I know we wanted to hurry up and we wanted to have this in front of us. But then everybody knows I want things done fast, and then I second guess myself. So, I take all the responsibility, but I just wanted to, make sure that we do it right. And, I want to let Supervisor
I got tons of questions, Mr. Chair.
Dela Cruz and Supervisor Hernandez, they can have the floor, but I just wanted to let everyone know my thought
Of course,
process.
I appreciate the honesty.
I have a concern that by delaying this, I don't know what's occurred. What's it, $4,500 right now?
Technically, per inclusionary unit, $413,000 as written in the amended ordinance.
$413,000? No, I'm talking about the in lieu of.
Oh, that is the inclusionary unit cost.
Right now it's 82,000
Well, yeah, per building unit, yes.
for building units. Okay. I understand.
Oh, sorry, did you mean
this minute,
currently?
right
There
this
is, oh, sorry, I apologize, thank you.
Yeah.
Currently,
Come up with it.
that's the whole reason for coming with an
So
amended
there's nothing
ordinance.
right now?
There, what's currently written in the ordinance is to be determined, basically. So it asked, and at the time in 2016, it stated that the county would come back with a report and a study that determined an adequate price. So
I have an issue with that because we
Nothing
have,
currently.
we have set the development agreements. Some developers will pay this and some will pay that. And I mean, one that I can say that it's going to be good for a community is Santana Ranch. They're doing the 555.
Yes.
And that I commend them. But I can't say that for some other projects. And so I understand, Supervisor Batalla, you're concerned that the extremely low should not own a home, especially if it's a 2,100 square foot facility. I mean, home, that's a lot. I mean, a lot of people will be happy with a 1,500 square foot home, but you're talking about 2,100. So I have some issues just on that parameters. But I think this conversation right now for the next couple minutes is a board policy, and I mean not to exclude both you and Dulce, but I think the board, if we are going to go in a direction where we need to address the extremely low and not talk about this, and go into rentals, don't forget. Two bedroom rental can go for about $2,500, and the extremely low ain't going to be able to afford that. So if we're really serious about addressing how to help the extremely low, I hate to say this word, but we need to make sure that the rent control is in place too.
There is, when you do the,
Just for rentals?
when you do the rentals, it has to be capped at certain levels, so you can't,
Yeah.
they can't ask market value. That's
Right,
part of,
right.
that's part of, it's part of the ordinance.
Because I mean,
You're correct, Jaime.
Yeah, I agree with Supervisor. But also, if you increase demand, supply, you could lower the demand a little bit too.
well, I've seen that, and that doesn't happen with rentals.
I know.
It doesn't
but,
happen.
But I think it's easier to help more people with,
Right.
The tighter units and smaller units.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm going to bring the other side of the argument, and is that do we want a community of inclusive, and do we want a community that we're just going to build all the low income, extremely low on the west side of Hollister, or are we going to spread it out through the whole community? Because at the current trend we're doing, we build everything on the west side of Hollister, with the exception of Santana Ranch, which is still yet to be built. So, I mean, she does bring up some good, valid questions, and I definitely don't want to see my neighbor's kids moving out of Hollister, because there's that migration that if you live in San Jose, they're moving their kids who can't afford down to Hollister. So now we're going to move our kids out of Hollister to Los Baños, Augustine. So it's a trend. If we don't set policies to make sure that we take care of our own, kids, then are we just following that policy of, kicking you out of the community and go live somewhere where else is cheap? And I mean, it's this tough question, and you might be right, Mr. Chair. Maybe this is something that we need to further look into it, but I just have issues right now that there's nothing in place in terms of
Well,
consistent in lieu of fee structure.
When you say there's nothing in place, Supervisor Dela Cruz, there is. It's us. We determine the levels. Us five sitting here, if something came in front of us, correct me if I'm wrong, please. If something came in front of us today, we, the five of us, come to the conclusion of whether it's 60,000 or whether it's 50,000 or whether it's X. So that's kind of how I understand it. If I'm
Yes, you're correct. What was amended in the language is basically just to be a little bit more clear in terms
Yes.
of the authority, but that's still written in the original version.
Let me kind of clarify, though. So we have the ordinance, it's my understanding that we have the 15% on-site and 20% off-site. So the building is already set, the building construction, but the fee is not set in the ordinance right now.
speaking of in lieu, yeah, the in lieu.
So that has been a voluntary contribution from those developers, and the board can't necessarily compel those developers to pay that fee unless there's a development agreement
Yes.
that they wish to voluntarily enter into.
Understood.
But we could say,
Thank you.
correct me if I'm
Supervisor
wrong, we
Gillian?
could say whether or not you need to agree to this development agreement, and these are our rates, and if you don't like the development agreement, we're not going to agree to it, and it takes three of us to agree to the development agreement. And then the other thing is right now, currently the way it is, we can just say, no, there's no in lieu of fee. Either you build 15 or you build 20, because it's not clearly spelled out. And
Yeah.
I'll leave my point there. I have a lot of points to make, but I'll wait in line because I think I'm behind Mr.
Supervisor Hernandez?
Sorry about
I
that.
don't mind Supervisor Gillian mentioning that could be the last one. That's
Okay,
fine.
I'll go ahead. So here's some of the concerns I have, and number one, I wanted to thank staff because you guys worked incredibly hard on this, and it came really fast. And for me, that was one of the issues. I got the agenda Friday, no excuses. I studied it over the weekend, and these are my comments. I would have met with you guys before it got published, but this is kind of the first time I've got to see it. So when I read through Gruen and Gruen, it talked about worst case in lieu of fees, and I totally understand why ours changed because of your gap analysis with the extremely low, and that's what increased us to the 82.6, I believe it is, 82.6. And Gruen talks about the worst case scenario was 34,000 to 46,000 in lieu of, which equates to about $16 to $22 a square foot. And then they further went on to say, well, basically, based on what you're building in your community, the Santana Ranch, trying to think of other developments in the county, but based on what we're building, those square footages and not these bigger homes, you're looking at an in lieu of fee of about 16,000 to 21.4. So when I initially saw that 82.6, I was like, wow, that's a pretty big number. And then now, it took me some time to understand exactly how you guys got there, and I understand how you got there. But what that's going to do, frankly, and Gruen says it, by the way, in their study. Here's some wording exactly from their study that we paid for. It says, however, imposing the maximum in lieu of fee of approximately 34,000 to 46,000 per market rate unit, that's their worst case scenario, not our worst case scenario, is likely to cause land values to be close to zero, if not negative. Therefore, landowners would have no incentive to sell or develop land or produce single-family housing units if the maximum in lieu of fee is based on affordability gaps are imposed. So what we're doing essentially, as long as we all understand this, and maybe this is what we want to do, I'm not saying we don't, I'm just making some points. What we're doing is we're saying by imposing this in lieu of fee, we're saying you are going to build on site, because I don't believe that anybody, I would like to get more industry feedback, frankly. I haven't got any of it yet. I'd like to get some more of that, is I don't think anybody's going to build at affordable, or pay the in lieu of fee, right? Because now they're going to have to pass that 82,000. By the way, the developer isn't going to pay it. The person who's buying the house is going to pay it. So now we just increased all of our single-family residential by 82,000 if they're going to go the in lieu of route. But I think what we're telling them is we don't want them to do that. Like Supervisor Dela Cruz said, we would like them to build their affordable on-site. And I think that is important. And I think we want to encourage that. That's the point on the in lieu of fees. And I'll let you guys hash that out. I'm okay wherever you land on that. But here's some of the technical stuff that I would really like to see worked out before we move forward on this. And this is why I would support, I think, I'm not sure who said it, maybe Chairman, maybe kicking it back and getting some more ad hoc feedback. One thing is, it is more of an industry standard now to go beyond the 30-year. You'll see a lot of jurisdictions doing the 45-year. Our current ordinance is under 21.03.006. is 30 years, and it also allows transfer to family members, I believe, siblings, I'm sorry, children. And some of, I don't know the right answer, by the way, I'm just pointing it out. Other ones I researched are death, sale, or transfer, so you can't keep transferring it down through generations of your family. And maybe we want that, maybe we don't. But then I guess we have another issue. We have to make sure that the person who's getting the benefit is also qualified. So maybe maybe my mom was low income and now I make more than that level, and we got to make sure that we're examining those people, which I'm sure we would, but it's just another complication. So an example of like one other issue that I see that I'd really like to try to get worked out is we talk about a minimum number of 50% of the affordable housing units shall be 3-bedroom units. And you could probably answer this question after I'm done with all these points here, but I don't understand why that is. Why because some projects that's probably not going to make sense, and then for other folks, maybe if we didn't make them all 3-bedroom units, we could make more affordable units and benefit more people. Because on the example of a 100-unit project, we may only be benefiting, 5 of the very low, or the extremely low. So that it's great to help somebody, but 5 is not a lot of people to help. And we're not going to be building thousands of units in the county. So if you look at the few hundred that we're going to be building and we help 10 families, it's great to help 10 families, but I want to find a way to help more folks. So there's that point. And then one of the things that I still don't see addressed that I've brought up from here and also at the retreat, folks are calling it the missing middle. I call it people that are just working really hard to try to get by, and how do we address, and I don't know the answer, by the way, I'm just bringing it up as a topic we need to think about and provide some good leadership for. How do we address the folks that are mechanics that are making $80,000 a year, or police officers or nurses or teachers, firefighters? How do we address that? And again, this is more of a hypothetical question because I don't have the answer, but I don't think we're addressing that here, and maybe that this is not the place to address that. But if it is possible, I would sure like to come up with a one-stop solution to address all of these 4 levels here, as well as what some people term as the missing middle folks. Another technical issue, sorry, I'll get back to those now. Second mortgages. I talked to folks that have these ordinances out there, and one of the issues is it's apparently it's a lot easier to limit the sale, but one of the things we need to really make sure is that there's a notice of intent on the deeds. To if somebody wants to do any type of transaction on the deed or on the home, that there's a notice of intent, that there's a subordination policy that goes straight to the county, so that we have the say. Because a lot of times you'll see County of San Benito on deeds. I don't know if you've ever seen a deed or your house. It's pretty normal to see that, so it doesn't really raise a lot of red flags. And again, this is maybe more of an administrative thing, but how do we ensure that somebody who gets one of these homes does not go out and get a $150,000 second mortgage, and then I'm gonna stop making payments and I just walk away with $150,000? Because we really want this home to benefit folks that need it and try to curb abuse as much as we possibly can. So there's that thought. And I think that can be handled by a notice of intent or secured by deed of trust, San Benito County. And then I think we need to really examine how we're going to handle our sales. So if somebody gets in there, they're there for 5 years, as you mentioned, you can sell the home. You're not, we're not going to keep you there. You're not a prisoner in your own house. So if you want to sell the home, do we as a county, do we guarantee the sale that we're going to buy it back and then we're going to reissue it to somebody else? And do we guarantee that's going to happen within 90 days or 60 days? Or and then my final thought is, and I don't think this matters as much because of the gap analysis that I see here, but does it make sense to tie this to square footage as opposed to single-family residential units? What I've been told is that there's a potential for developers to want to build the 3,000, 4,000, 4,500 square foot homes because there's, if you take, let's just assume they make $10 a square foot, whatever that number is, I don't know. And they build obviously a 4,500 square foot home versus a 2,000 square foot home. What are you gonna make more money on? That one. So we may end up having a net negative increase of housing because there's a loophole that we're not thinking of. And maybe you guys have already thought of that, and maybe tying it to square footage doesn't make sense. but I'd like to understand that a little better. And with that, Mr. Chair, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Dela Cruz?
Yeah, well, I was kind of holding back on my questions, but I guess Supervisor Gill, you open it up. I do have some questions. My first one is, there's a section in the language that says, the definitions that says that priority will be set on people that reside or work here. Why can't I say people who work and live here? What's the difference?
There was no changes made to that wording
The
from the
definitions?
previous ordinance, so that's still maintained. That is something that can be discussed. I think the purpose of it was, to address different types and different types of groups of individuals. So
And- yeah.
that's something that can be reviewed.
Yeah, and I guess on that same subject matter, there are sections in the ordinance that affordable housing doesn't have the same definition as the three components. And so somehow in the definition, we need to put that affordable housing will be defined as those three. I'm sorry, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That will be 4. And then I actually have the same questions that Supervisor Gilliam, such as why 3 bedrooms is 50%. Sometimes we should max out the number of units. I'm not going to repeat the same thing with Supervisor Gilliam. I actually agree with them on that one. And then what happens when the house is sold, and what is the price determined and what income? So I think so. There's some language in that, what can be defined. So, I have those kind of questions. I'm still kind of, I think, I gotta admit, Supervisor Botello hit my nerve, I guess I have to admit that. Because I'm a very strong advocate of very low-income housing component in our community. And it's kind of hitting in my chord, but at the same time, I understand the reality. We'll put in an expense to the developer. I get that point. And I think there's some kind of compromise we can all agree and reach. And I think probably the best way, the way Chairman Medina said it, is take it back to the Planning Commission, let the ad hoc committee look at it and see if they can come up with some better ideas. I totally agree on that. And then in reference to Supervisor Gillios about the dollar amount that we set on a developer, and that dollar price will be set to the future potential buyer, which is half true, because in reality, developers sell the home based on supply and demand and what the market's willing to bear. There's 2 different types of pricing. One is what the market bears, and the other one what we guide as a development policy. So there's some truth to it, but not reality, because if a house goes for $600,000, all of a sudden we impose a $80,000 fee, the house is not going to increase for $680,000. Somehow the developer's going to absorb some of that cost. I agree with that. That's absolutely. But not necessarily true that the new home buyer will pay the entire cost. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Hernandez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll keep my comments brief. I think a lot of what was said is really valid, and I appreciate your leadership on really trying to drive this conversation with a lot more clarity and making sure we don't make a decision ultimately that causes us to reverse course because of the negative implications. For me, it's about stability for our community and having an opportunity for folks to buy in. I really believe in ownership, and to that extent, in the ability to own your own home. But what that means different things to different folks. I support the intent of what Supervisor Botello mentioned, but I kind of struggle with the reality of rentals, because rentals I've seen, especially if you're dealing with Section 8, I know there's one down the street from me that there's always police going down there. So what creates that opportunity for folks to take advantage of that and better themselves? So, and because of that, and I get it, and I'm not a speculator, I can't assume, the market drivers and even the consumer motivation. So there's a lot of tangible questions I think that need to be had. And I think it's a good idea for us to figure out what that means. And in my mind, the immediate would be to support something that would have more of a ownership, but not the size of square footage as the 2,100 we were talking about, like maybe condominiums, basically starter. But I also agree with Supervisor Del Cruz that I don't, if we see a lot of apartments, what does that mean for our community? They might mean affordability, but but you don't know what the implications of having, basically. And I hate calling them projects, but project type, and I'm not saying that's what would happen or necessarily the intent, but if that happens, at that point, how do you reverse course? How do you try to protect the community from pretty much breaking apart the tangibles of a healthy community, and I think one of it is ownership. So, so all things considered, and I'm probably the least educated here about these elements, but from what I heard, it's very, very, very strong points on why we should move forward with the next conversation and not making a decision right now.
And I'm going to leave it at this. And, you know, apartments to me, they're not a bad thing. I've lived in a lot of different cities, a lot of different states, and a lot of different counties, and apartments are where a lot of people live. Now, the other part, you know, some of the apartments, I agree, the ones that are run down and the ones that are aged, yeah, there is an issue, but, you know, in Bakersfield, we had apartments everywhere. In Virginia, we had apartments, you know, everywhere. So we do need more apartments in this, or even like Gibson Station, you know, the little condos you were talking about.
Condos.
So, yeah, something like that. That's what I really think we need to see more of in these areas. And that's kind of, to me, would be a win-win. So that's, you know, right now, I just like to see us spend more time on this. And as I said, I'm the last person to say I want to kick this can down the road. But I think at this point in time, that's one of the alternatives we have. And I'll let the Supervisor Patella take us home here.
We haven't even heard from the public yet, but I think we've made some pretty good comments, all four of us, or I won't count mine.
No.
But, you know, one of the things I think is really important that some direction from this board should come out, I mean, right now, today, is that not one more application comes to the county without thinking that it would sneak under the bar of no affordable housing thing. And they will, whatever we decide at the end of this, expect to build 15, 20% affordable housing and pay the in lieu fees. I mean, right now, today. That's what I want to see.
And you're on record.
I'll second that motion. It's not a motion, but I'll second.
Yeah, and I'm with you. And yeah.
Yep.
Is there any public comment out there?
It's a temporary moratorium. Victor Gomez? It's because the applications will come in, just because he says it.
Honorable Chair, members of the board. First of all, I want to thank Supervisor Vitello and Supervisor De La Cruz for their kind little debate there, because I think it is important. And I do agree, Supervisor Vitello, that you just need to get your foot in the door for home ownership. My first place was a condo, and it worked out just fine. 24 years old, I bought a home. It was mine. Loved it. That was great. So it's important, and apartments are a component of that. I also agree, because I grew up right down the street from Supervisor De La Cruz in Villahermosa, that it shouldn't all be stacked on one side of the city. And I think that's, at least in kind of thought, is what you're trying to do here with this inclusionary housing ordinance and in lieu. But I do want to thank staff, you know, for their work on this. I understand the desire to identify opportunities for affordable housing. That is critical. But unfortunately, your approach here today, you could actually be creating unaffordability by trying to create affordability. Supervisor De La Cruz, you're right. You know, not all of that cost is going to be passed down to the consumer, but it is going to be passed down to the consumer. Not all of it, but certainly a portion of it will. So you're actually going to be creating a larger unaffordability gap by adopting a fee this high. I agree with the sentiment that you should be concerned about moving forward without having an in lieu fee. I don't think anybody here is going to fight against that, but it should be a fair fee. That way, you're not creating the unaffordability that could be a result of this. The fees included in the staff report, unfortunately, ignore the consultant recommendations. And again, unfortunately, stump the type of housing that we actually need in the community. Second, targeting affordable housing single-family units, as was addressed by Supervisor Vitello, is not really the right approach. It should be a multi-housing approach. And that's something that you could do by working with these affordable housing developers to create affordable housing in smaller units. I grew up on the corner of Gonzalez Drive and Buena Vista. My parents bought their home on a federal subsidy. And they had a 30-year a deed restriction on their home, but they bought their first home. And it was 12 of us that lived in that house. I was the youngest of 12 that lived in a 980 square foot house. And yeah, I was stacked in a room with 3 of my sisters, and oh my God, I never had money, but it was a place to live, right? And to me, it was home. Now I go back to see my mom, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this place is tiny, but when I was a kid, it was home. So I think the opportunities that you're trying to create are good, but let's take a step back and work with the industry to make sure that we find some common ground. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dennis Martin?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Dennis Martin. I'm speaking on behalf of BIA Bay Area, the Building Industry Association of the Bay Area. We represent builders and associated industries that are affiliated with home building, both single-family homes and multifamily. So we do have members and expertise in both areas of home building. And I will say that the program that's sort of laid out in this affordability gap analysis is, to I think most of our builders, an unworkable program. To award a home on the basis of a $533,000 affordability gap is not reasonable. For sale single-family homes are primarily going to be qualified to moderate income families. So those families that are making between 80 and 120% of average median income possibly can qualify. But it's a very different challenge to low, very low, and especially extremely low families. Because there's not only the mortgage costs, there's not only the down payment, but there are also costs associated with maintenance, home ownership associations, and other costs that come up, special assessments that come up and that can hit a low-income family very hard if they're trying to make their mortgage. So I would encourage you to think about this program not just as a single-family or for-sale program, but also to consider how you're going to transition to providing more rental housing. Now that rental housing can be stable. It can be deed restricted as well and restricted to income so that you can provide the very low and extremely low income units, and those units can be stable income, stable rentals that are not subject to market conditions. So I think that as well, we would encourage you to incentivize the development of for sale single-family homes to service providers in the areas, police, fire, nurses, teachers, so that you can keep those people in your community and not driving out to Los Baños to live. Also, work to develop a program to provide multifamily housing to low, very low, and extremely low income families. This is how you can keep those families in the community and not displace them to outlying areas. Collect fees. By setting a fee that is unsustainable, unpayable, you're basically, to my mind, instituting a dishonest program. The fee has to be payable. And it may be at a point where you're balancing, where you're balancing whether or not to pay the fee or whether to provide the units, but this program is not a workable program. So I thank you for taking my comments.
Thank you, sir. Is there any more speaker cards? I think Ms. Salinas.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Board. I have been coming up here before you when there have been developers that have been coming up here and asking for special favors because they misunderstood something or they didn't calculate something, then they come up here and say, oh, can we change our development agreement? And at that time, I've always said they always dangle the carrot before you to say, we're going to do some affordable housing, and you don't get the affordable housing because it ends up being more than people can afford. We have the opportunity here. Bring it back, do some more research on this. I think what we can do is, I've always said that there should be a different fee for low-income housing. And it's not asking the developers to pay more money, it's asking them to pay less, and or in the development agreement saying, you're gonna put up whatever percentage of houses, but let's build those first, and then you can build the other houses. You have the power to say yes and to say no to the developers, but you also have the position where you represent your constituents that cannot afford houses in this area. And I was a little taken aback, and I said maybe I was a little offended by Supervisor Botello, and I think you clarified yourself some, to say that people who are poor shouldn't have the vision of owning a home, and that's not true. That is the American dream, is to own a home. Doesn't matter how much money you make or don't make. So let's see what we can do by helping our people here stay here, whether it's a firefighter, a police officer, a nurse, or a farm worker. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing there's no more. Oh, Miss Tammy? Yes, make sure you fill out a card after, please. Thank you, Miss Tammy.
Hi, Tammy Aviles. And I just want to share with you what we're going through personally now. And I don't know, I mean, it's, we're looking for a single-family home for my in-laws. And we're looking out, I guess, towards South County, I guess that would be. And when we go to these developments, nobody talks to us about, oh, like all the prices are all $550 and above, and I explain that it's for my in-laws, and so nobody like informs us of, well, there's this opportunity for middle income or, you know, someone that is on a fixed income. I mean, they're showing us the, you know, $500,000, $600,000 homes, which my in-laws can't afford. So I don't know if in the process there's some way when we do go to the developments that we do get information if they do have the affordable housing on site. I don't know. I mean, like specific, I was looking at Sunnyside Estates, because that's close to us, you know. Thank you.
If, can you give her your business card? Thank you. Oh, now we have some latecomers here. Miss Valerie?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I don't know whether I can really speak from the Planning Commission or I'm just Joe Blow citizen, but...
hold on one sec.
She can speak the way she wants to. Probably speaking on behalf of yourself. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Because
make sure.
if I had been a fly on the wall at the Planning Commission's meeting, I would have heard a lot of confusing dialogue also. The clarity that this presentation has made and the expertise and experience that the board has brought to it to bring it back, that Fly would have said, you know, I think they've got a good idea. Let's bring it back, and then I'll come sit on the wall again. So, do you know what I mean? So anyway, that's my fly on the wall.
So are you saying we enlightened you?
Yeah. It was very
did something right?
very clarifying, and I think
do something right. No.
I think altogether that is really a plus when we hear the cross conversation. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Sorry. Any latecomers out there? Okay, we'll bring it back to the board, and if the board has any other questions, let's hear them at this time.
Mr. Chair, two comments. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Janelle and Dulce for bringing this issue forward. We really do appreciate your input. Second, Mr. Chair, I know that the recommendation, or we have already a committee, or we're going to push forward on increase in the number of committees. In the interest of saving time and pushing forward, I was wondering if you could appoint me to that committee. I'm very passionate about this, and I think we should start meeting, start talking about it, and hopefully come up with some good ideas.
I'll appoint yourself and me.
Perfect. Perfect.
Mr. Chair, if I may? I'm sorry, I'll defer to you. 16 years is definitely more senior than 4 months.
Okay, well, my comment's not long, and it's, you know, sometimes it gets late in the afternoon, I get a little shorter, and, you know, I was disappointed not seeing some sort of incentivizing on zero lots rental units. I think that has to be part of this ordinance, and an opportunity for developers to provide, we need rental units. And, you know, just for clarification, I know that is the American dream, Ms. Salinas, is to have a house, but sometimes life has different circumstances. I just draw upon my own, and I've lived in apartment units, and thank God there was rental units available at, when I was a kid. And I grew up in an apartment myself, and I had that opportunity when I was a younger person, getting my education and my first jobs. You step up from things. You don't automatically become an adult and you're able to afford a $500,000 house. Or you're a young family, you're able to afford a $500,000 house. You kind of grow into these things, and I think that's what we're trying to strive and create those opportunities for our communities. And I personally would love to see more inclusive neighborhoods and areas. All the, you know, low income shouldn't be on the west side of Hollister. It should be scattered throughout our whole county. And that's what I think we're trying to strive for in this ordinance, is to create, you know, a quality lifestyle for all our citizens. And I believe it's achievable.
Thank you. Supervisor Gilliam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So quickly, I agree with, I'm so glad we had this conversation, because, you know what, I feel the energy from not only this group, but from our team members and from the audience. We're all saying the same thing. We all want to have an effective way to provide affordable housing and ways for our community members to buy a house, whether it's very low or the missing middle or single family folks that are buying at market rate. We need to have these affordable options available, and I'm really excited that we all feel this, and that Jamela and Dulce, under Ray's leadership, have really pushed this forward and got it to us so quickly. And I'm equally excited, and I think under the leadership of Chairman Medina, that he's not going to let his foot off the gas on this. And I think that this is something that we're going to get done. We're going to get it done soon. And I would just challenge our board members to ensure that if we do have any developments that try to sneak under the radar, so to speak, before this is done, that we all hold the line and pay attention to, you know, what the end result that we want is, so we don't have that happen. And I think we can make that happen. And then my final question would maybe be a question for staff or the board. Who do you foresee sitting on this board, or to move this forward? Is that something we should discuss today, so we don't lose a month of time to talk about it, or have you already decided that, or what are the thoughts on that? I heard here we appointed Chairman Medina and Jaime, but I'm sorry, Supervisor De La Cruz, but what's the rest of that going to look like?
There was a developer, there was...
Yes, so there'd be a total of 3 public members. It would be ultimately appointed by the chair board of the Board of Supervisors. And again, it would be an affordable housing builder, someone within potentially the nonprofit industry.
CDB,
Mm-hmm.
Is that someone like a Sunny Flores? Is that...
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And then Dulce is going to kind of add a little bit more about kind of the application process that an individual would go through. So
Okay.
there would be some type of vetting. It wouldn't necessarily be, do you want to expand a little bit? Yeah.
That's something
But
we can
that-
get going pretty quickly. We don't have
That
to wait a
wouldn't
month.
be for developing the ordinance itself. It would be subsequent to the ordinance being adopted.
We're talking about developing
Exactly,
this
'cause
ordinance.
we're-
It would just be in
Oh, you're talking
a
about developing
committee of the board.
Well, we can do that both ways.
That's
You
right.
could do
There's,
it.
it's not any type of violation whatsoever.
No, you just have to agendize everything. It would be, if you have any other members of the board subcommittee, it's a Brown Act committee. If you have officially other members as part of the board's committee,
Jaime's got the answer.
go ahead.
Well, I mean, we can invite 2 members of the planning commission. Would that violate the Brown Act?
Nope.
You can invite them to attend, but they can't
Thank
be
you.
members of
We
the
can invite 2
committee.
members of the planning commission, and then this group can make some recommendations to invite 3 people who you think qualified on that, your guidelines, and they'll become unofficial members until we officially develop the policies, and then we can continue talking that way.
I guess why not just make it official and just notice a meeting? I mean, what's the
I
difference?
totally agree. Totally agree.
I'd go with Jaime. Yeah, we can make it a meeting. It's all up to what everyone believes in.
As long as we don't have a Brown Act violation issue.
But on like an ad hoc committee, we don't give
That's right.
notice.
Ad hoc committee is composed of solely a minority of the board or not a
Minority,
Brown
yeah.
Act committee unless they're
It should be
under,
minority of the board also, right?
Then
Two,
listen to the next part.
but once they have actually, if a committee has members other, like
Oh, of
another
the boards?
member.
Okay.
If another member or another individual is part of the, like, part of the board subcommittee, then it's a Brown Act committee, if you have other people besides a minority of the board.
So what it is here is it's timing. It's how fast you want to move this forward. Because if we need to, I recommend we do this officially, eventually, for sure. Take this back and actually create the committee. But if we want to work, we have a gap in time this next month. We're not going to meet until the 23rd.
Exactly.
Realistically, August. We want to keep this thing moving forward. We need to probably do what Supervisor De La Cruz had mentioned. In the meantime, we can still work on the other portion and make it formal. So I think we should do both tracks at the same time, just to keep this moving
That's what you
forward.
meant. Okay.
Mr. Chair, may I ask one quick question? I'm sorry, I just need to have this clear in my head. I'm one of those guys. So if we have 2 Board of Supervisors members and 2 Planning Commission members, now the Brown Act applies?
Mm-hmm.
Right, okay, thank you. I didn't know that till today.
And so you'll have a nonprofit and someone from the building industry?
And then lastly, we're seeking potentially someone who has like a financial or accounting background.
Those are plenty. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
So it would be myself and Jaime, a nonprofit, a building person, and someone that has financial.
Or accounting.
So this is not how it's going to work. Don't get me wrong, but it'd be like someone like I'm looking down the audience, someone like a Scott, someone like Mr. Martin, something similar to that.
Correct.
And then if Victor knew finance, it'd be someone like a Victor.
Correct.
Okay.
Take an online class, Victor.
Okay. And then the second part of this is like Supervisor Botello and everyone else said is, if something happens within the next couple of months here, let's make sure that we look at our 15%, look at our 20%, and if it's off-site, make sure we charge the appropriate dollar, not just.
Yes, I already put our RMA staff on, that's what I was working on right now, forwarding an email to them, letting them know to keep that in mind and be aware of it, and as well as with Harry, so.
And we also have 2 planning commissioners here also, so. Now, other than that, it's, who wants to make a motion and how do we want to go forward?
Is it direction good or?
Just direction.
Or
Mr.
just
Chair.
direction? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's fair for now. We're good with that. Thanks.
Thank you. Now we'll go on to the final item.
Move to approve.
There's no approval
No
needed.
approval
It's
needed.
just a,
Yeah, it's just an update.
just an update.
Pardon?
Oh, man.
I
We're
think
go-
everything's
We're gonna
getting
push
pushed.
off. We're gonna push it.
No, did you guys address the bylaws come back to you guys?
Chairman, our planning commissioner whispered in my ear that we could maybe do the bylaws for the HAC, the Housing Advisory Committee. Do we want to do that now, or do you want to push that off as well? Just a question, I'm not.
There's only a discrepancy on that end. In our recommended ordinance, we were changing it to 7 members. As our current member stands, it has 6 members. So the
That's fine.
bylaws address 7 members. So there's.
I think we should address it.
It doesn't align.
Well,
You're more than welcome to address it if you want to go ahead and make a formal vote on it.
It's 3:17, so you know, it just, the day's over anyway, Anthony, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
Make a
guess.
minor
I'm not a
amendment to the
good chairman.
bylaws. So,
Okay, yeah, we'll address it. Bring it back.
okay. So Ray, I'll bring up the,
Sorry about that, Dulce.
okay. So,
No, I think
No, I
we're
think that
gonna
we're
do
doing
we're gonna make the
bylaws.
change, or maybe make the change. Yeah.
Unless she's bringing this other thing up.
Oh, never mind. All right, I misunderstood.
You wanted to vote on it, right?
Oh, I thought we were going to do the bylaws.
Yeah, we're gonna
oh,
do the
I'm
bylaws.
sorry.
No,
We're gonna
my
do the
bad.
bylaws and vote on it.
I'm
Dulce.
sorry, my bad.
I'm like moving on.
No,
to
it's
the-
my bad. It's tell
Okay.
me.
So bylaws, we need to.
We got to eat lunch today, too.
Hmm?
So we haven't had lunch, and my head's still off.
I gave you guys lunch.
That's what I
Barbara,
said.
would we be able to adopt the bylaws today?
It just says introduce the bylaws. So you probably should bring them back at a subsequent meeting for adoption.
With the changes to.
You
to
could
go
bring
with
them
our
back
current
before the actual ordinance is prepared, though, so you could just throw them on consent at
Okay.
a future meeting.
So we'll bring back the bylaws, maybe on consent with, to align with our existing ordinance.
See, I had my
Works.
motion, right?
So we'll bring it back.
All right, so we're done with that. Okay, so let's move on.
Are we sure?
All right. I'll go ahead and intro this, Mr. Chair. So this is the, and to be clear, this is the actual Field of Dream Ad Hoc Committee that was created by your board, and our two board members, Supervisor Hernandez and Supervisor De La Cruz, are on the actual ad hoc. We've met the last month or two, probably a couple of months now. We've been working on moving this forward, and what I wanted to present to you briefly, and then I'll turn it over to the ad hoc, is kind of where we're at, just from a timeline perspective. One is I've actually met with the city of Hollister, the city manager, as well as the superintendent for San Benito High School, and addressing the actual lease agreement, as well as addressing Nash Road. And one of the requests from San Benito High School is that they'd like to see that Nash Road closed permanently. That was part of the original agreement that we're going through, through the school year. Having it open in the morning and closed, or closed in the morning and open at night for traffic, through traffic. And one of the things that the high school would like to see is that closed. With that being said, is that they would just transfer that property over to us, where it gives us a lot more flexibility with moving forward with the project. Now, so I met with the city manager a few times, and it looks like they're going to be bringing it to their city council August the 5th in the evening time. And we will probably be bringing our item on August 6th. With that, I'll be meeting with him in the meantime, drafting a staff report and discussing that a little bit more further. So what we'd actually receive then is, you'll see the 47 acres there. There's the overview of the actual property and line, so that there's 3 pieces of property there. It equals about 47 acres. The county owns the Palm Tag property, or was the Palm Tag property, which was about 23 acres. And then the Lannis property, there's actually a solar farm there now. But we were originally, back in 2010, I think even before then, the actual park master plan actually consisted of, and go ahead and turn it to the other page there, Dulce. It actually consisted of all 3 parcels. So it included the Palm Tag, the Lannis, and the high school property. So when you look at it, there's about 3 fields, 3 or 3.5 fields there on the Lannis property on the right-hand side, that is now occupied by the solar farm. So if you go back to the, Dulce, if you go back to that other, you'll notice that it actually it's 2.5, fields that are being, blocked out with the original master plan. So the ad hoc's been meeting. We've been discussing this. We've been going through this, and kind of what their thoughts are at addressing kind of a change. It's an amendment to kind of the scope or what the plan was some time back. And so with that, I probably will go ahead and defer it to Supervisor Jaime de la Cruz and Supervisor Hernandez. But, we've been meeting with different folks. We've gone out there. We've actually met with the BMX folks as well to look at the property. And, I know that Supervisor Jaime de la Cruz and Supervisor Hernandez has actually gone out to different facilities that they can go ahead and talk about. But I wanted to give you kind of a lay of kind of what the park master plan would originally look like, what property acquisitions we have, what we're doing right now in the meantime to acquire fully the 47 acres, and then, moving forward with this. But we're still moving forward and progressing through, all of this. Probably won't see anything happen until next year, but, we're moving in that direction. But I'd like to go ahead and hand it to the ad hoc committee. They can talk a little bit more.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my first recommendation is to remove the name of Field of Dreams Ad hoc Committee, because originally we thought that a Field of Dreams was probably the best options, but after visiting a couple complexes such as Twin Creeks, Ripon, and other ballparks for San Benito County and for economic reasons, it was more of the committee's interest, which consisted of Supervisor Hernandez, myself, and Mayor Ignacio Velasquez and council members Roland, and other business and sports individuals, that a sports complex was better suited for San Benito County than a Field of Dreams. When you have a Field of Dreams, it's mostly structured for baseball, whereas a sports complex, it's a multi-use. You could have soccer, softball, baseball. You could even play baseball and lacrosse too, my understanding. You could even play lacrosse. And so we kind of took that direction away from a Field of Dreams concept to more a sports complex. And as more meetings we had, the group said, why don't we start inviting other members of the public? And sure enough, we said, it's an excellent idea. In fact, Valerie was and will be invited to the next committee meeting we have when it's at the Citizens Committee level, because at that time we decided to put the brakes on and said, Ray, we need help. And so Ray decided to get his staff and our subcommittee, Supervisor Hernandez and myself, and we asked Ray, what is the possibility and what is the realistic of this moving forward? And so Ray and Dulce and the rest of the staff started doing a lot of work on behalf of the subcommittee. And I'll tell you guys, it's more than I thought, because we envisioned this maybe by the end of this year. Now we're maybe looking at maybe 18 months to reality. And one of the things that's hindering to moving forward is working together with the high school in the city of Hollister, and that is Nash Road, the closure of Nash Road. And the city has concerns. The high school has a piece of land that is very important to this concept. And so we are here today because of that situation. In fact, we're going to have a committee meeting Thursday with city, 2 members of the high school, 2 members of the city council, and Supervisor Hernandez and myself, and talk about how we can work together regional-wise on moving forward in a sports complex. At the same time, we had a gentleman by the name of Mark, forgot his last name, Mark. Hirsch, thank you, who thought that a BMX park might be doable, especially if it's temporary, knowing that the sports complex will probably take about 18 months to move forward. And I'm all for bikes. Don't take me wrong. I think it's wonderful. When I was a kid, I used to have a red line. We used to go through China Hill. We used to drive on China Hill all the time. That was how guts I had, is, to top of the park hill and ride straight down. And I was not the only one. There were a bunch of my friends too. But the reality is, when you talk about a temporary bike facility, there's a lot of intangible costs associated to that. We're talking about potential restrooms, potential parking space, added facilities, and sooner or later this temporary becomes a permanent, and then it can hinder the sports complex. And I was straight up front with the gentleman and said, look, my priority is straight out a sports complex. If somehow we can work together, I'm all in. We have had other interest groups. We had an indoor soccer request. We had building an own soccer field. We had building an own facility for other type of sports arena. And I kept telling a lot of the folks, the interest of this body, unless it's subject to the board of supervisors, is to move forward with the sports complex. And we're at the staff level, the committee's at the staff level, and we have one final piece to discuss before we go on to the next step, and that is getting the blessing from you guys to allow us to meet with the high school on on potential closing Nash Road so you can gather the other 47 acres. Otherwise, this sports complex cannot happen with that other 47 acres. And that's where we are today, Mr. Chair.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Is there a piece that we need to get from the city as well? The city and the high school, isn't there something with both of them going on there?
I don't know the answer.
So I think the question, and just, is that when you actually, you can't see it on this map. Can you see if it's on the other map? No, it's not on the other map. Nash Road, we own half the road, and the city owns the other half of the road. And the school, they kind of use both sides, so they want to close that where the gates are at currently.
Yes.
They like to permanently close that.
Yes.
24 hours a day.
But in order for this deal to come through, the city
has
agree
to
it as well.
That's right.
And
And
are they amenable to this as well?
and that's
Are they okay with it?
The city?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Well, I just gave a presentation that I just talked to the city manager. He stepped out for a second. No problem. So I talked to the city manager. We met. I think they're going to put it on the agenda on August 5th. So I highly recommend anybody that wants to go to show support. I've been inviting a lot of people in the community because it does help us kind of expedite moving forward with this park. It also helps the safety of the students and quite a few other things. So, and then if we're going to put it on our agenda as well, if the board is okay with that on the 6th. But I'm going to meet in the interim I've already met with Billy, I think 2 or 3, I would say 3 times. But I'm going to meet again one more time to discuss the staff report and kind of next steps on how that should be drafted, and then that'll be on the 5th. Yeah.
Supervisor De La Cruz, I want to let you know I support this 100%, and I wanted to apologize to both you and Peter, Supervisor Hernandez, with the BMX bike track. I totally support it, and I don't know that it necessarily has to be there, by the way. We're trying to think of something, and I think you guys are too. It's not, I thought you guys were on board with this, and you had already met with them early in the day. I went to the meeting at night.
Yes.
And I was thinking we let's do something as soon as we can, even if it's not here, it's just something temporary. Maybe the city has some property or we do, because there's a lot going on with these kids out there, and it would be great to find them a spot, even just temporarily, because I know that this has a BMX section kind of in there as well. So anyhow, those are my thoughts. So I don't want you to think I was putting the cart before the horse, and I never promised anything to anybody. I just trying to find a solution in the meantime.
No, absolutely not. In fact, Ray and I talked about it. We said, no, actually, it's a great idea. There's actually, how about Vets Park?
That's what we were discussing. There's a dirt area in the backside, Vets Park. There's restrooms. There's other things. So I think there was some conversation that we had as well with that. But
So, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, just to give a little bit of the feedback from my end of the ad hoc. Yeah, and we totally appreciate the support that we've gotten for the board to move this forward, because we really have been, with the passionate heart, very focused on making this thing work. We, like was mentioned earlier, we visited 3 parks, which was Twin Creeks, the Field of Dreams. Twin Creeks is with Santa Clara, the Field of Dreams, which is in Manteca, and we went to Ripon, which is in the Ripon community. Twin Creeks is a really successful venue. It's 10 fields. They actually have a multi-sport layout with the and I think it's an artificial turf. So basically, it's a year-long venture, which obviously gets those fields being played on. They're very active, and it's a public-private partnership, meaning the private side of it is very vested in making sure not only that it's profitable to them, but ultimately it's a long-term investment for them, which is why that part of it means that that park is really focused with active, interest. Basically, there's a lot of leagues that are playing there. There's, what was mentioned by Mr. Collishaw, which is the one that runs it. It's so successful. A lot of the times when they do their league tournaments, they flow over into other schools, because they don't have any other ways to support the amount of traffic that they get. And now it's even a good opportunity for them to use one of their championship fields for entertainment type venues and stuff. So it's a really active field. And then the Field of Dreams in Manteca, it's a huge economic driver. Before that, and I actually met with Mr. Whiteside, which was a big part of the leadership. He's an ex-city manager who played part in that whole process to try to get that to happen, and that ultimately became a huge economic driver for that community, because before that it was a lot of open land right off the freeway, and once that happened, all of a sudden hotels and restaurants started popping up in that location. So, and then with Ripon, it's a large complex, it's seven days a week activity. All these different things, all the things that we've learned have been, it really has informed our discretion when it came to it. So on our end, yeah, we got excited and we started basically engaging with the local folks, a lot of the local leaders, like the varsity coach for the baseball team here at the high school. And then we also met with the Tremors League director, the Hollister Heat president. We all sat down, we talked about this idea. We thought, what would there be their buy-in? Because in our mind, the goal wasn't just to support something where it's just a park, but ultimately where it's like we already have the systems in play to make it very active, where there's already a lot of momentum, whether it's creating local leagues or even establishing our own little regional tournaments that feed, a lot of travel ball type tournaments in our community. And at that point, because I've been around the baseball community a lot. My son was a big part of it from the time he was 9 all the way up to being an adult, and they were always traveling out of town because there was no place here locally. So, and that's just on the baseball side. I know on the Tremor side, soccer is a growing thing. There's also lacrosse as a possible opportunity. So it becomes a huge element of success, I believe, in our community, especially being on the other side of the high school with the Olympic swimming pools just being built out, and then also we have the new fields that are being put in. So that whole area becomes, I think, a huge vehicle for success, especially with Union Road being connected to 156. You get a lot of traffic coming into the community to benefit. Now on the weekends, this becomes a hot spot or a venue for good economic activity. So, and like was mentioned earlier, we've had a lot of staff time spent on the legal part of it, the property acquisition, and ultimately the multi-agency buy-in, which is basically the city with us, with the high school. We're all really talking and really engaged about this piece of property. So at the end of the day, those 47 acres we don't have just yet, so we're working hard to get that. But the feasibility, which a big element I believe is also we need to make sure that we're always planning ahead on the parking side, right? Because that location, parking always seems to be on the back end of the burner, and ultimately then all of a sudden you wish it's like you can never have enough parking as far as the location goes. So I'm trying to just basically explain that there's a lot of considerations and how this field can be used, and we want to be careful that we're not trying to throw two different ideas together on one location without basically making sure we flesh it out. And ultimately, like I said earlier, where we even protect the idea of a pump park, because ultimately, if that's what the community wants, I agree we should support it. And it's just making sure that we're trying to get that everything in place so that both venues could be, or both ideas can be successul. So yeah, I mean that we're about to have that meeting pretty soon with the superintendent of the high school. I think it's going to be a really productive one, and I believe because of the momentum that we've gotten, it's really going to be a win-win for our community. And I would love definitely to make sure that we move forward with support from our respective board. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, just 1 minute at best.
Sure.
In the transition, it changed my mind, and it changed a lot of the committee members' mind. That is, the number one gathering is soccer. Soccer tournaments really dictates a lot of benefit in our community. In fact, proving that your family, your son made it to the second place. I commend your son and you as a parent for the soccer stuff. And it's very important, and I know Valerie's out there, and some of her concerns was about why is it all the parks always being private gated? And we're looking at a private-public relationship. That's the only way it can really work. And every time we talk to somebody in private or investors, they need to understand that the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday will be used for the public, for our community, because otherwise it's not a go. It has to be that way. And then the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays will be tournament play. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll just, good work on everything. Just to let everyone else know is my son just returned from a tournament in Boise, Idaho. And the commercial that aired, which my wife sent me, was the economic revenue in 1 week's time was approximately $14 million. The field is a public-private field, just like Supervisor Dela Cruz stated. Simplot, which is a large agriculture corporation, it's a Simplot field, and this is just it's amazing because I never realized what type of revenue was out there with these venues. So I want to make sure that when we do something, we do it right. We look at these these different match plays and different softball, baseball, lacrosse, and so forth and so on. So,
Yeah, it's all good. The only thing I have is more technical. Maybe I have amnesia or whatever. Didn't we already have possession of the 47 acres, and through an agreement with the high school and the city of Hollister that we approved, and that we were going to review in 3 to 5 years' time to, as far as the closure of Nash Road permanently, and we're coming back a little bit sooner than that. But we already have the property.
It's mine.
Go ahead.
We have an MOU by which that they could enter into a 99-year lease, and that's what we're working on, to bring back the formal 99-year lease. But the lease is not as beneficial as actually owning the property if you were looking for developing a project. So instead of waiting longer in time to close the road and to get permanent ownership of that property, we're hoping to get fee title of that property earlier.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And the other thing that is, I'm supportive of doing the ball fields, whatever it is. I just want to see green down there. We need some clarification as far as Hollister's plans with West Side Boulevard too.
Yeah.
Is that still in books?
I talked to the mayor, and he thinks that if it's going to happen, it's going to be 99 years from now.
Yeah.
So also,
But,
Supervisor.
it's something in our design, and it's something that we keep in mind, going, as you spend money, because we're talking about millions of dollars, and we know what it takes to develop a park. And you don't want that West Side Boulevard going right through the middle of the heart of your...
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that, Supervisor Patella, because ultimately that was definitely part of the conversations, because we need more space rather than less, because there could be an opportunity for trails and other things outside of that venue, so it becomes a lot more of a regional benefit in that sense. And one of the things that actually, because I had also talked to the mayor, and he mentioned that maybe at that point we start talking, and I believe even Harry mentioned that it would be a good idea to maybe look at changing that design plan so that becomes more just a park zoned area, and then instead of West Side Boulevard going right through it, we have a lot more park space, and then maybe even talk about Riverside as a long-term game plan to basically become a relief valve to the west side of that area. So,
Yeah, and for clarity, for those of you that don't know, so when you look at the map there, it's right on the right-hand side. It kind of goes underneath, kind of there's like a boulevard right there that comes on the bottom side of that. So it's dirt right now. It's not.
I was on the meetings with when they put the solar panels. Hollister agreed that the solar panels could go there as long as they could be removed when they put the road in at the undeveloped price. And as long as we have enough history with Nash Road being closed and all three agencies are comfortable, I'm fine. It's good.
Yeah, and that's another key point here, Mr. Chair and Supervisor Patello, is the river walkway. That's going to be important, because that's going to give character to the sports complex. It's very important that we support that part of it too.
And
Valerie's out there. She would lobby for it.
And there's also potential increase in cost. So when you look at that, there's going to have to be, bridges and other things, walkways underneath to go from the River Parkway to the actual park itself. So, but we've been discussing that, and more to come with that. I'm going to be meeting with the city manager, as I mentioned, and we're going to be taking this item back.
So, Mr. Chair, to wrap up this presentation and allow public for input, I'll wait till the public input first and then ask a question to the board.
Valerie?
I gotta be quiet, Henry.
I appreciate the humor. It allows me to relax a little bit, because these things kind of get my ire up.
Of course, ma'am.
Since 2013, the Parks and Rec Commission, they validated the creation of Reach San Benito Parks Foundation, and it was meant to be the lions that protect this space, basically, for the public. And I listen to the plans that are becoming alternates to what the original thoughts were, that this be a regional park for our regional population. The little historic park that we've got can barely be taken care of. It is full of gopher holes. This is well used by all families. They have to drive out of town. There is nothing really humane left of the Veterans Park for the accommodation of family fun on the weekends. We've got little tiny spaces, but this is extremely important for the population to have a good space left after you've developed what you feel is going to accommodate travel teams, which I believe and have always preached the viability of parks and the association to our economic well-being. So it's just for me to say that it's extremely important to maintain in our minds that we are accommodating our families, that they're going to be able to walk down into that space and they're going to find a place to picnic. They're going to find a place that they can share a baseball team with the neighborhood, that they don't have to wait for a day in the week when all we've got is the weekend. That's not right. It's just not right. And Reach will fight to the nail for that, for our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your passion. I love it. Anyone else out there? Bring it back to the board.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Direction?
Yes, I'm asking, the committee's asking with a blessing to continue to the next phase, and that's to negotiate and work with the city of Hollister and the high school.
Nope.
The one thing I just learned about was that West 5 Boulevard issue. I'd really like that to go just beyond one council member's opinion, because
Yes.
20 years from now, none of us are going to be here. So if you can encourage them to bring that to the full council or the city manager to get some sort of resolution, because that would be a shame to lose this over a roadway. Thank you.
I think you are correct, Supervisor Gilliam.
Okay, we'll head into closed session. Can you provide us with details?
Number 49, closed session, conference with legal counsel. Anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to subdivisions D2 and E2 of Government Code Section 54956.9. It lists number of cases too, but we're only going to actually talk about the first one, which is potential litigation relating to letter received on January 22nd, requesting the county enforce the zoning contract between the county and the Ridgemark Corporation. The other matter under that agenda item will be deleted. Number 50, closed session conference with real property negotiators, section 54956.8, Buena, street address is 0 Buena Vista Road, APN 01902300002 on Buena Vista Road. And the agency negotiators are Ray Espinoza and Barbara Thompson. Negotiating parties, Granite Rock, under negotiations, price and terms of payment. And the closed session is number 51, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to D4 of Government Code Section 54956.9, number of cases 1.
Is there any public comment? See none? We'll head to closed session.
This is really fast.
That extension is, and that's something that was kind of put in the plan.
Which extension?